Good morning or good afternoon, everybody, depending on where in the world you are joining us from. My name is Kelly Barner, and I am so pleased to welcome you to today's Art of Procurement industry webinar. So the topic of the day is finding the right places to find the right supplier relationships. And we're going to talk about a number of different things related to making that a successful effort on procurement's part. Certainly, communication goes without saying. That's an enormous part of any kind of healthy relationship. But we're also going to talk about maybe some less expected things, like making sure suppliers have access to the information they need from us in order to be effective as our partners, and also how to streamline rather than shorten the supplier discovery process. Now, in just a moment, I'm going to bring my guest on, but I want to give you a couple of details first, just some quick housekeeping things. We do like for these events to be interactive. All of the Art of Procurement events, in fact, are sort of down on slides and big on thought leadership. So you'll notice up the right-hand side of your screen, there's a little chat box. I will be keeping an eye on that as we go through today's event. Please put in your comments, put in your questions. Let me know what parts of our conversation today resonate with you, and I'll be keeping an eye on that to bring in some pieces to the conversation. So questions and comments are both welcome. Without further ado, let me tell you a little bit about my guest today. Tiffanie Stanard is the founder and CEO of Stimulus, and we recently featured her in an AOP introducing live stream hosted by my colleague Helen McKenzie. So we've heard a little bit about the Stimulus platform and the value proposition, but today she's going to be here to share her expertise around building and maintaining healthy supplier relationships. Let me tell you about a couple of the things that I know we're going to be getting to in the conversation so that you can sort of start pre-populating the discussion stream. One of the things that we're going to be talking about is ways procurement can set suppliers up to help us be more effective. When Tiffanie and I were prepping for today's session, we talked about the fact that supplier sales reps are regularly bombarding procurement with emails, just trying to find the right timing to reach out. And there we go, Tiffanie. Welcome back.
I'm glad you can see me.
Yes. I was actually just sharing with all my friends here in the audience about the conversation you and I had previously around supplier timing. You know, procurement feels like we're constantly bombarded with outreach, cold calls, sales messaging. And as frustrating as it is for us, it's not actually because suppliers are trying to be annoying. It's because they're trying to catch us in the right moment of time. So before we start digging into the procurement side of things, can you talk a little bit about maybe the supplier's perspective on some of the relationship challenges we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, so you brought up a great point. So I hear a lot when we are pitching to different companies, and my years of pitching to different companies, either you met me at the right time or you missed me at the right time because I am now, already put out an RFP or RFQ, RFI, and something, a product or service that you're offering. And for a small business, for a startup, you don't know when it's the right time. You don't know when they're about to switch out their HR software and that contract is up and they're now looking for a new platform or they're looking for specific services. Because unlike, when you're hiring, you kind of put that hiring, posts everywhere. You say, hey, we're looking on LinkedIn, we're looking through Google, we're looking through different platforms, and it's everywhere. But when you're looking for a certain product or service, it's not everywhere. So you never know the best time to reach out to a particular buyer. And it's the worst time for us as trying to market. So the only thing we can do, right, is bombard your emails to hope that I'm catching you at the right time. And it's not good on our side. It's not good on your side. And we really want to fix that within our industry, just how do I meet you at the time that you're looking for the product and services that I'm offering? It's not wasting your time and it's not wasting my time as a business, because it always comes back to how are you building a relationship? Well, I can't build a relationship with you until you answer my email.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fair. And so as I had started to say, I would love to put an invitation out to the audience. Share your advice for how you manage that issue of timing. It's something that procurement will always deal with and always has. And while they do that, Tiffanie, let me ask you, so we heard a little bit about your entrepreneurial backstory, your journey to procurement, but let me ask a follow-up question on that. Why the buyer-supplier relationship? What is it about that part of the business journey that really inspired you to say, this is where I want to focus?
I love that question. I feel like everybody focuses so much on the logistics side, when you're going to receive your package, when you're going to
Yeah.
receive
Yeah.
something that you order. And I said, that's great. But, you can't even think of logistics until you buy from the company, until
That's
you
right.
interact with that company, right? It's the beginning stages. It's the beginning of the relationship. It's how you select that company, whether it's a large company, a startup, a small business. It's the relationship that builds over time. And then, every business starts out small until they get their first, their second, their third, their fifth customer. And then their goal, hopefully, depending on their goals, is to grow into a larger company, or at least a medium-sized company, right? Now, everybody wants to stay small. Sometimes you're pigeonholed it to stay small. So I'm excited about that side because I always look at your suppliers as your external team. They're helping your employees put out a product and service that you're selling to either, a consumer, or you're selling to B2B, or both B2B, B2C.
Yeah.
And it's the start of how you work with a company and how that relationship goes over time. So it makes me excited because I get excited when I get to buy for my business. I mean, I don't get excited about everything, buying paper and pens, but I get excited if that product, that vendor is helping me do my job better.
Now, so much of what procurement is focused on today is digital, is automation. To what extent do you think having these digital tools helps us in the supplier relationship process? And to what extent do you think it can actually either get in the way or sort of redirect our attention into some place that's less constructive?
Great question. I think, similar to even consumer buying, you can get bombarded with so
Yeah.
much information. You go buy one thing and it's following you across the internet. So that's never fun. So even on the buyer side, I think you can get bombarded with data, bombarded with, again, like we talked about earlier, people reaching out to you once they know, what you're looking for. And that can be a lot as well. And it's trying to, separate from the noise that you may hear and see.
Yeah.
But I think digitizing data and understanding the data that you have in front of you, or lack thereof, is supposed to help you do your job better, right? It's help you find what you're looking for at the time you're looking for it, whether it's a product or service. It's supposed to help you be excited about the fact that this contract with this startup has now created 20, 30 jobs just
Yeah.
working with your one company. Once you know that information, right? It's supposed to help with that. So it's a catch-22 on both sides. It's so much information,
Yeah.
but if you're streamlining the information, if you're using something that brings the information in a more concise way and can be seen differently across different stakeholders, I hope that it's supposed to help you do your job.
Well, let's stay with that idea of information for a minute because procurement tracks a lot of information, but most of it tends to be very transactional. It's about a contract, about a company, about a purchase, about a payment. Whereas on the sales side of most companies, they're using CRM, customer relationship management platforms, and they're using that to track everything from, yes, point of contact, address, standard things like that. But you might also be tracking little notes about an important event or a milestone in that relationship journey. Why do you think until this point, from an information standpoint, procurement has been so much more focused on the transactional information than the relationship information?
That's a great question. I've been asking myself that for my entire career because when I went into consulting and I was helping different procurement teams and different sourcing teams and then supplier diversity teams,
Yeah.
I was helping them track the relationship from the time that they interacted with that supplier. When did you meet them? How did you meet them? How many times had that supplier reached out to you? How many times have you, sent them to this person and that person, and what happened with that? And I never saw that in platforms that I was using of like, why do we not track that relationship? Because on most kind of platforms and portals, they're, like you said, tracking the transaction and when did you pay them? How much did you pay them? But everything else, you're asking a colleague about. How do we know them? Why should we work with them? Or, Googling them, right? I have times when I'm pitching to people and they're on my LinkedIn page as I'm pitching to them. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, you're trying to believe what I'm saying and you're looking me up right now, right? So all of that information has never been tracked, but it's information that you actually use to make a decision when working with them. And even with the platforms or CRMs or SRM, supplier relationship management, again, it only ever tracked the transaction, but not the actual building of the relationship. And that's how you actually decide to work with them. Because throughout my career, it was like, hey, I want to work with this corporation, but I don't have a relationship with them. And then the same thing, hey, I want to work with more startups and small businesses, and we're about to, switch out this contract. Can you make a recommendation? And then I try to form a relationship, but it's just never been tracked on that side. And I think what I've seen, sourcing procurement teams has never, until probably the last few years, looked at suppliers, one, as their external team, and two, as a part of their competitive advantage. And I'm seeing that now over these last few years, which is great, but it's still very transactional versus you, especially depended on them these last few years, whether they were in the same city, different countries, and realize what relationship you had or did not have with them.
I actually think it's an excellent point that you make, and I'm very excited to hear that it sounds like we're making some progress. I always think back to this sort of legacy procurement idea that knowledge is power, right? And because these relationships are about power and influence, well, we can't possibly share our knowledge. We're not going to share our information. And then we're so surprised when we don't have a deep and lasting relationship. Can you provide maybe some updated guidance, either based on your personal experience or what you've observed at large over the last couple of years? How should procurement be thinking differently about the decision to share information with a supplier that traditionally or in the past we might have held closer to the vest?
That's another great question. Because I feel like, again, if they're a part of your external team and you're not giving them information of when to contact you, what is the right stakeholder that they should be working with? What's the best way to work with them? One, you're allowing for us to bombard your email over and over again because we're trying to work with you and we see a reason to work with you and have you as one of our customers. And it's understanding the importance of, again, relationships, but looking at where else do you do this? You do this with your customers, you do this with your employees, yet the folks that you need to help your employees, to help the customers that you're serving, you don't care as much about, right? So I think it's very important to kind of bring those two together.
Yeah. One of the things that you've said a couple of times that really resonates with me is this idea that you need to think about suppliers as your external team. And it almost seems like maybe that mindset shift is the first step. So if we start thinking about, and it's not going to be everyone, right? But some of those key suppliers, if we start thinking about them as members of the external team, our behavior and our choices and our comfort level, and so therefore the relationship is naturally going to change. When you talk about thinking about suppliers as part of the external team, what are maybe some examples that you would give of what that looks like in practice? Is it a tone of working? Is it a level of familiarity? If I want to start trying to check myself to see if I am thinking that way, what might be a few things you would encourage me to try to start moving myself in that direction?
Yeah, first doing an audit of how the suppliers are placed in the systems that you're using. How are you tracking that relationship? How are you tracking your interactions with them? What are your interactions with them? How often do you talk to them? The way you, again, talk to your employees and your customers. Have you asked them if they needed anything as much as they're asking you, what do I need to do to work with you better? I think it can go to them as well. Like, hey, how's it working with me? Like, we always talk about, us trying to get into company supply chain, but as quickly as the world changes and us deciding on where to buy and who to work with, it's also who to contract with. If you don't believe in the values of that company, startups and small businesses that are creating innovative products and services are now getting choosy of like, hey, if we don't believe in the same things, if we're looking at the world differently, I may not want to work with you, right?
Yeah.
I just remember looking at, when I was in payroll and looking at our balance sheets and how much we really spend and how much big companies especially spend externally with these suppliers to get their job done. And when it's something that's so high on your balance sheet and you care the least about, never made sense to me throughout the years. And I think of myself as a small business and a startup where before I had a team, everybody that I worked with were either independent contractors or vendors. And then now that, we have more people in our team, I'm still working with them as much as I'm working with my employees, right? And those folks are helping my employees. So I just never understood the disconnect between the two. So I think the first thing is doing that audit of how are you tracking with them? How are you working with them? How are you interacting with them? And are you presenting them with other opportunities to work with you? And then what other stakeholders around your organization could they work with? Maybe you're busy if you are their direct contact, but most people in most product and service have this kind of land and expand approach where, hey, let me start with one team, then I go to the second team, then the third team. How can you make that process a little bit easier for them? And they're not going to bombard you people only bombard you when they don't know, when they don't have information of, hey, are you looking for this now? Or are you looking for this 6 months from now, 12 months from now? I'm telling you, if you tell us when to reach out, that's when we will reach out. We're not going to just do it because it's very time consuming.
It is, and it's expensive. Sales is expensive, right? And so for every outreach procurement is receiving, as frustrating or overwhelming as it might be, it's still a reminder that the less precision information we provide suppliers with, the more costly we are to serve. And as we've talked about, CRMs and all of that are very established on the sales side. We shouldn't think for 1 minute that all of that information isn't being tracked and going into the decision-making process, right? And to your point, especially where it comes to small, innovative suppliers, each time they accept a customer, they may also be making the corresponding decision not to take another customer. So those are very strategic decisions for them. And they're going to choose the companies to partner with that they believe they can serve well, but also that provide them with the opportunity to grow. And so procurement may be signaling things about the potential relationship to come without even realizing it, simply by not going back to that supplier and saying, you know what, Q3 would really be a great time for you to reach out to me. Is there realistically any downside to offering that information? If we say to the supplier, reach out in Q3, have we really given up any leverage?
That's a good question too. I think depending on the supplier, right? Some people can abuse information and still reach out to you in other times and put you on what they call a drip campaign where you're still being bombarded over a period of time. But again, it's only when it's cryptid information that you're sending, like, okay, reach out at Q3 and you don't answer. And then we're like, okay, well, I did what you asked me to do. So I think if it's Q1 that they tell you to reach out in Q3, what is our interactions between now and then that allows for the relationship to grow, hopefully in an organic way, that when I reach out to you in Q3 for a possible opportunity, whether it's a one-time purchase or RFP that you're about to put out, how do I now build up that relationship leading up to it to make sure that I'm in the running at least, right? At the time. And I always say, even with stimulus, like, we need our product to sell our product, because we hear it all the time about meeting you at the right time or talking to you at the right time. And we're always trying to figure out how to showcase that relationship over a period of time. Like, how do I interact with you leading up to that time frame so you don't forget about me? And we do, the same sales things where we're emailing and sharing, reaching out through email and calling and doing, campaigns and newsletters and all those things to stay top of mind. And I had a couple of calls this week and we were pitching, and I just said, what made you answer my email? Because you didn't know me. We were you know what I mean? And it's trying to figure out even what to say in those emails to get a response. And it was like, oh, what you wrote sound of interest to us. So we responded, and this is what we're looking for right now. But if it was 3 months later or 3 months prior, would that have been the case?
And what a powerful opportunity to ask that question. It makes me think that probably a similar opportunity exists for procurement. Certainly RFPs, love them or hate them, they're still very common. They're not going anywhere anytime soon. We collect so much information, whether it's an RFP, an RFI. We are gathering all of this data from suppliers, but we're not necessarily asking the kind of information that we would need to start fostering a relationship. Are there some different types of information? I mean, I'm sure there's some overlap, right, where you get a sense of what's being asked in an RFP. Do we think this supplier is going to be a good sort of cultural fit between the two organizations? But there's probably some information we should be asking for that is specifically used for deciding what that potential relationship might be like. What is some of this expanded circle of information that procurement should look to suppliers for early in the sourcing process?
Yeah, so I try to bring what I call non-transactional and transactional information together. Because again, like I said earlier, in most kind of platforms and portals, you're asking for the size of the company, you're asking for maybe a reference or two, you're asking for financial information, very just transactional kind of, maybe just the numbers, right?
Yeah.
And if you're considering a small business or a startup and trying to compare them to a larger company, obviously that larger company is going to have more money and certain, a certain size that you're used to. But again, as a small business, as a startup, you can't grow until somebody becomes your first, your second, your third, your fourth customer, right? So it's going back to remembering that you start small before you become a bigger company. So that's first, like us trying to showcase, this larger company may be obviously bigger than the smaller company, but what other data points can you look at that's important? Hey, maybe the smaller business is a customer of ours and they understand our product and services. So they are also quote unquote kind of a brand ambassador for us because they're using this as they're trying to become a vendor with us. Maybe I can customize this product because they're small and nimble, and this larger company, you're just going to get it out the box, right? It's so many things that we want companies to look at when it comes to data. And again, this is information you ask your colleagues. This is information you're Googling. You're on our LinkedIn page. You're on our website. You're trying to figure out this information separately, but it's never information that's been tracked. And other relationships that company may have with you. Have they attended past marketing events and so many other things, like truly understanding like, hey, I may already have a relationship with this company. It's just not coming through sourcing procurement, but maybe they're working with marketing, or maybe they know the CEO, they went to school together. So many things that we know that's how business gets done anyway, but it's just not tracked on a platform to say, hey, this is why you should work with them, or at least consider them as a maybe joint contract or an opportunity where you can start them with one team before they grow into another team.
Now, I know from you and I speaking previously that there's something you do not want us to ask for, and that is capabilities statements. So explain that to me. First of all, what is a capabilities statement from your perspective? And what do you think is the problem with those?
Well, I think, yes. Years of being asked for capability statements. What I don't like about capability statements, well, for everyone, I'm sure everyone in this call knows a capability statement, but it's supposed to be an overview of your company. And as you're selling, to corporations, government asks for it the most, but corporations also ask for capability statements where it's supposed to give, a quote unquote Cliff Notes version of your business. Yeah. And what I didn't like about it and sending it throughout my years is once you send it, if something great happened with your company the next day, that company that you sent it to does not know the information. So then I am now following up with the email saying, hey, did you hear? I'm now working with this big corporation, or I just got this big investment, or we just got this big customer. So it was never something that was able to stay up to date enough for me to think that this was like a good paper to send. Yeah. And given the Cliff Note version of your business, never really closed business. Because again, it kept going back. How do we know this company? Who else have they worked with? Do we want to work with them? Like, it's still, you start doing other things outside of this capability statement to decide if you want to work with them. And then as a person of color and, women-owned businesses, we all know Cliff Notes version of your business never gets you business. Yeah. So it just becomes out to date very quickly, no different than when you put a supplier information in these portals, and then a week later, something can change with their business and you don't have that information. Yeah. So for us, we wanted to digitized capability statements where we want to give the supplier a better way to tell their story, and you can't tell it through these stagnant PDFs. You just can't. Yeah. And I would always send it and follow up with links to, hey, did you see this? Did you hear this? Because that's what ultimately made your decision on how you wanted to work with me.
Yeah. Now, before we go on and start talking about supplier discovery and collaboration, I actually have an excellent question that has come in from Cheryl. And she asks, how do you balance this attention to relationships and collaboration with a company culture that is focused on risk and performance? And I would even add compliance and governance to that. There are so many regulations. So we've talked a lot about the need to build relationships, certainly based on information. But even if procurement is more open to the idea of sharing information with suppliers, the company culture where they work may be highly risk averse. Do you have any advice for Cheryl and the rest of the audience about balancing those two things?
Yeah, so the information that we want sent to the suppliers is not, giving proprietary information about your company. It's knowing what you're looking for when you're looking for it, right?
Yeah.
And it's trying to figure out, how do I best present a presentation to you that will have you consider me now or in the future? It's, how do I get in front of you before this RFP comes out, RFQ comes out, RFI comes out, right? Or if there's something that you're about to make a quick buy on, how do I get in front of you at that time? So, we, in the customer side, it's called customer listening, but we're not listening and thinking about how we work with our suppliers. And if you're looking for this, you're about to purchase this, don't you want the right companies coming to you at the right time? And companies that you may have put on a sticky note to follow up with, I'm sure 20 other companies are going to reach out to you in that instance, right? Mm-hmm. So, but don't you want to remember the one that you actually wanted to work with, but 20 others kind of distracted you and you forgot, right? So I think and it helps with risk and compliance as well, because if you know and have a relationship with that supplier, if anything comes down the line risk-wise, you have enough contact and interaction with that supplier to either they're helping you with that risk or they're a part of helping you solve those issues. Because at the end of the day, your relationship with anybody, a part of your company, is supposed to help either fix risk or prevent risk, right? Yeah. And I think when you don't know that much about your suppliers, that's when risk comes in, because if something happens, you won't know and they won't feel comfortable to tell you either way.
Yeah. Interesting point about customer listening. I like that. That's sort of an interesting thing to bring into the conversation. An excellent question, Cheryl. Thank you so much for asking that. Let me go from there to something that I actually think is going to be really fun. So as we start thinking about supplier discovery, what are some of procurement's bad habits? What are some of the things that we do wrong, that we don't do, that we should be doing, that we're doing, that we should stop? What are some of those common bad habits that you see?
Yeah, so I talk a lot about data versus habits, and people professionally buy the way they personally buy, people personally buy the way they professionally buy. And what that means is, if you decide to go with a larger coffee company every day versus a smaller coffee company, that's kind of how you bring into your professional buying. It's quick, I know them, I'm going to go over here, versus thinking about that smaller coffee company on the corner that if you work with them and you buy coffee from them, often they're going to grow compared to the larger company that's not going to miss your $5 that day, right? And I think it's very important for companies to look at habits that they start to form over time. And even, let's talk about supplier diversity, right? So we're in, we're a diverse company, a women-owned company, Black-owned company. And what I've seen throughout the years, where there's this database of diverse suppliers, right? And if once, 2, 3 different times you go to that database and you don't find what you're looking for, the habit starts to form. There's no woman in this industry or person of color in this industry. And you may be right for that second, or you did not look hard enough. And those habits start to form over a period of time. And part of what we're trying to do within the platform is say, hey, Are you looking at it based upon data? Or are you looking at it based upon assumptions? And people stop going to those databases. And it's not until somebody says, hey, check this out again, a colleague or, the CEO, and no different than personally. If you go to a store personally and you can't find what you want 3 different times until a friend, a wife, a spouse says, hey, let's go here again, you're not going to think to go here again. Yeah. So we're trying to change the habits and the assumptions that there's, a small company that can't do this, or a woman-owned company that can't do this, because those habits start to form, or that it's a daunting process to look for us as if we're not here. So we're trying to change those types of habits. And then also understanding, again, bring it back to every company starts small until they get their first, second, third contracts. So don't box in small companies as if they can't work with you, because before you work with the big guys of the world, they were small.
Yeah. I think your coffee example is a good one, not just because I like coffee, but I think from a consumer standpoint, it's sort of easy to get the comparison, right? You either have the really big national chain where it's going to be very consistent, you know exactly what you're going to get, you go through the drive-through, it's zero contact, but you have your coffee. I can also think locally of the other end of the spectrum, little boutique coffee shop, super cool experience, different drink, might not be precisely the same every time, but it's always really good. But when you think about how procurement would boil that purchase down to specs, we would say, okay, I need it to come from maybe this geographical location. Okay, we'll both satisfy that. I need it to be coffee. Yes, okay, it's got caffeine, it's coffee. I need it to cost about this much. There's still something sort of outside that traditional circle where we maybe have to develop curiosity, some more attention to opportunity, that drive as a consumer that makes us say, you know what? I'm going to treat myself today and I'm going to drive a little further or not do drive through. I'm going to build the relationship. I'm going to invest in a slightly different kind of experience versus just checking the box. If I don't get caffeine in my veins inside of 5 minutes, right, the rest of the day is completely shot. We need to sort of think through. It's back to that mindset we were talking about before. How do we change the way we think about what we're going to get from that contract, that supplier relationship, so that we're capturing some of those things outside of cost, location, caffeine, right? It really does make it start to sound like a far more innovative, far more collaborative process if we can pull it off.
Right. And what I've seen, again, the way you're thinking personally, folks have been thinking this way and saying it over a long period of time. Yeah. But when it takes longer, like you said, than 5-10 minutes, then the thought goes out of their head and they move on. And that's what I just haven't seen across different platforms that I've been on, whether I've been on it as a buyer or as a vendor. Like, how do I take away from you thinking so hard about this? How do I take away from you thinking so hard about choosing a woman-owned company? It's not you choosing a woman-owned company, it's you choosing the best company for what you're looking for, and they happen to be a woman-owned company. Yeah. And that's what we're trying to switch. Not necessarily the mindset, but just the activity that makes you think so hard.
Yeah, because the business wants us to speed up. So as wonderful as this whole process sounds, we know that the business is right there waiting for us to help them make progress, or they're going to work around us. Right. How can we streamline supplier discovery instead of just trying to accelerate it? Because all of that added value is going to be lost if we just try to do it faster. What are the opportunities to streamline the process, compress it, but still make it more effective than it is today?
Yeah. So for us, and what we're trying to do to streamline that process is understanding, again, where did you meet them? What notes have you taken on them, and concising that in one place? And then also looking at the different stakeholders that have worked with them and their relationships with that supplier, looking at digitizing those lists that go around in circles and circles and circles throughout every company, and not knowing where those companies are on that list, and us trying to do that within the platform to say, okay, you have 20 companies on this list. Who has worked with them? Who has considered to work with them? What are their notes on them? What are their performance evaluation on them? Why are we paying them? Why are we not paying them? All of those different things. And then also looking at all of the relationship that you have, even as we work across these different sourcing procurement teams, it's understanding as medium company, as a large company, you have so many business relationships that, again, maybe they're labeled as a customer, maybe they've attended, your webinars throughout the years, and you quote unquote have some sort of relationship with them. How do you use that to maybe work with them as a vendor, and or even know that they've been reaching out to become a vendor, right? Like, that's all of the information that our goal is to track and to showcase the importance of that, because again, you won't decide to work with them until you know why. And if you Google them, do you find the information you want to find to say, hey, I do want to consider working with them, and here's why. We talk about like the larger companies in this area. The complaints are, big sometimes, like, this doesn't do this and this doesn't do that, but they would still rather choose that larger brand because of legacy than they would a smaller company to try them out and give them a chance. And that's always a little crazy to me, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Well, and I think one of the challenges that procurement faces is that even if we have the best supplier discovery process in the world and an amazing RFP and we're good at negotiation, most cases we're still not the ones making the decision about which supplier is going to get the contract. And yet the company is looking to us to mitigate risk, to increase diverse representation in the supply chain, to introduce innovation and new ideas. And so if they're looking for us to deliver those things, but they're ultimately the ones making the choice about who gets what contract for how much, how does procurement back up and start thinking differently about both supplier relationship building and the discovery process, simply to make it more realistic that a new supplier might make it into the fold after we work through that whole process?
Yeah, it's looking at how do you collaborate with the other stakeholders, because to your point, most people are not even interacting with procurement and sourcing until they're trying to get a budget approved. If it's over, the threshold for their organization where they need the approval of procurement at that period, or maybe even in finance or operations, and depending on the size of their company. So what we're seeing and what we're trying to do is, like, how do we help stakeholders that are working with these suppliers the most and making the decision with these suppliers the most is able to share that information with procurement, is able to share that information with sourcing, and also bringing together how they're working with diverse suppliers, and it not being such a separate task. Or even sustainability. Everybody has these corporate goals. So whether it's sustainability, local spend, reducing carbon footprint, to carbon emissions, to, diversifying their supply chain, how do you bring it together where the platform is easily utilized for any stakeholder that has the ability and the opportunity to work with that supplier as that supplier is growing throughout that enterprise?
Now, as we start to round our time, I want to get some advice from you about how people might start to make this change if we've won them over with our conversation. If I'm a procurement person and I have a very typical supplier discovery, I maybe say supplier relationships, but they're not, let's face it, they're not really relationships. Is it enough to maybe pick one supplier where I do well with my point of contact, or where I think there's an innovative opportunity? Can I pick one company and start, or does it need to be something that's a little bit more at scale in order to really drive change and start switching people's mindset up?
Yeah, I think you can start with one, but I think you should start with more, especially because most companies have thousands of suppliers. I think doing an audit of your suppliers, and not just the normal audit that most people do, which is just looking at, again, the transactional information about that supplier, and looking at, how much you've been spending with that supplier. And that's important as well, because you want to know where you can save money and where you may can switch out over a period of time. But an audit to understand, what information do I have on this supplier that I've been asking other stakeholders about, or the information that I've been Googling, do I have this information on this supplier? And how did I actually ultimately decide to work with that supplier? And it's not just the financial information. And once you do that kind of audit of, like, why am I working with this supplier? Who else could I be working with? And bringing that information in one place helps you decide on what relationships you have with that supplier and what relationships you should have with these suppliers, And then also it helps you realize what relationships you don't have in your database as well.
You know, and it's an interesting place, I think, to sort of bring things full circle, where you talk about, you could look at a supplier relationship as just the financials, just what did I spend with them and what did I get in return? But doing so is basically the mirror image of looking at procurement and saying your entire value is going to be determined based on the savings number that you delivered. And we all know procurement is capable of far more than that. And so we should try to get things moving in the right direction by looking at our suppliers in a more well-rounded way as well.
Right.
So Tiffanie Stanard, thank you so much for being with me today. I appreciate you sharing your time, your energy, your expertise, your fabulous green that we got up on screen. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope that the audience enjoyed the conversation, and I could talk about this stuff all day. So.
And absolutely, anybody that has enjoyed the conversation, certainly connect with Tiffanie on LinkedIn, but also check out either the Art of Procurement LinkedIn page or our website for that recent AOP introducing session. And of course, you see the link up on the screen right now to check out our events calendar. We have a lot of things coming up, including our August 8th event, Category Palooza. We hope you will check out that list and join us for an upcoming event soon. Until then, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. We hope you have a great rest of your day.